Good afternoon, everyone. In this lecture video, we're going to be talking about Chapter 5, Language. Not all language necessarily in the fact that we speak English, but how we use language interpersonally and how we can improve our language to be better perceived by others. We're coming right out of Chapter 4, Perceiving Others, and all of the things that interface with how we perceive ourselves and how people have concepts or maybe misconceptions or assumptions, and how we can work to overcome some of those things. Of course, our language definitely plays into that. Here's some of the learning objectives for Chapter 5. I'm just going to skip over these. I've got a bunch of random emojis up here. These are all symbols, and they stand for something. And our textbook will tell you that language is also symbolic. And by that, we simply mean that words are symbols until they have meaning. When you were a kid and you were first learning to read, you probably started off with a picture book because some of those pictures held meaning, and we learned more and more what these pictures meant. And we learned more and more about language just by experiencing the world. There are many words today that we still don't know. Teachers and scholars will learn new words in our language every day. Oftentimes you might come across a word in our textbook that you may not know. So maybe they make no sense to you or it's new to you, and you have to take the time to look them up. So until it has meaning, it's just symbols. It's just a collection of letters. Language is governed by many rules. Phonological rules govern how words sound and in what order we put them in to make different sounds. I'm going to play you a short video. This is an old I Love Lucy clip, but it's super relevant to what we're talking about with regards to phonological rules. English is really difficult for some people. We have a lot of grammatical structures and different words that all sound the same, or they might have the same spelling, but they might mean something completely different. So it's just going to be a little bit of humor that we're going to throw in for this week.
Take this book and pretend that our child has come to you and said, "Daddy, read me a good night story."
All right.
There you are, Daddy.
Once upon a time in the woods lived a peasant. He was a good man with a noble heart. He spent his time in the forest cutting down bushes from the trees. Cutting wood.
Wait, just a minute. What is this bouges?
Bushes, right in there.
That's boughs.
B-O-U-G-H is bow?
Right.
Bow. He spent his time in the forest cutting down boughs from the trees. Cutting wood all day made his hands strong and raw. One day...
That's rough.
Spelled the same way as the other. O-U-G-H.
That's right. That shows how little you know about the English language.
So I made a little mistake. Made his hands strong and rough. One day he cut wood so fast that by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, his day's work was through.
Hold it, Shakespeare.
Through?
T-H-R-O-U-G-H is pronounced through.
Through, that's what I always say. Now stop picking on me, will you? You're getting me all confused. His day's work was through. It started to rain on the way home, and he got so wet that his nose became red, and he developed a hacking... Goop. I know it can be cow.
It's cough.
Oh, that did it. I had enough. Or should I say, enu?
As you can see from this example, we all know words like cough, rough, bows, and through all end in O-U-G-H, but they all have very different pronunciations. And of course, there's different pronunciations in different languages. Our book talks about words like champagne, double, and occasion, and these are also French words, but they're all very different. We also have certain regional dialects out there. If you ever happen to find yourself in Louisville, Kentucky, and you pronounce it Louisville, you can definitely let some of the locals there know that you're from out of town because they pronounce it Louisville, even though it looks like it's spelled Louisville. But anyways, language is also governed by syntactic rules, and these govern the way symbols can be arranged and what order we can put a word in so that it's spelled correctly. So this talks about the order of words in sentences as well. Without the use of proper pronunciation, you can really confuse people. Using double negatives, like you can't not do something, means that you can. I have a fun example here. Jane enjoys cooking her family and her dog. If you omit the comma after cooking, it means that she's cooking her family and her dog versus she enjoys these three different things. Language is also governed by semantic rules. These are how we apply meaning to language. It allows us to agree upon the definition of certain arranged symbols. So it means B-I-K-E means bike, and that's something that we ride. And a book is something that we read. Pragmatic rules are the guides of what we use to interpret the message in an appropriate given context. That seems kind of hard to understand, right? We got this great definition here, but what the hell does that mean? It basically means that there are many words in our language that sound the same, but mean very different things. For example, if I say that I'm going to bear something, what does that mean? Does it mean that I have a teddy bear or I'm trying to carry a heavy load? This also follows up with the subjectivity of language, and don't worry, I'm going to go back to this slide. I've got words up here like rare, busy, depressed, and dinner. We learn in language, as well as in our communication, that meaning is both in and among people. Meanings are not just words. Meanings are created through the lenses of our different life experiences, how we live, where we live, and our worldviews. They're all very different. If you look at the word rare, for example, that could be something that is an off occurrence. For example, I see snakes all the time on my hikes, but someone else might consider seeing a snake to be a very rare occurrence. But to me, it's something that I see all the time. If you're hungry, you could look at the word rare and think that's just how you want your steak done. That's a very different use of the word rare. Some people might interpret the word busy very differently. If you have one extra meeting in a day that's outside your normal routine, that could be busy. Busy could also mean that you're working 12 hours out of the day instead of 11 hours out of the day. Depressed is a varying degree of how someone feels, and it's also a word that's used to describe to press a button. We have condensed the word depressed down to just press, as in press a key, but for several decades, the word was depressed. The word dinner has very different meanings to different people. Some people consider dinner to be an afternoon meal, whereas other people consider it to be more of an evening meal. Some people just call it lunch or supper instead of dinner. These are all very different meanings that follow pragmatic rules. Language and worldview are based off of linguistic relativity. Linguistic relativity is the language that reflects and shapes the worldview and those who use it. It reflects our power distances, our cultural differences, our situation and relation, and we're going to talk about this more as we get into these additional rules. On this slide, we're going to talk about naming and identity, and I apologize in advance. My Prezi is sort of a mess for this video lecture, but I just want you to think about something, or maybe you can ask your parents later. Why do you think you have the name that you do? For example, my name is Adam, and the reason for that is because I grew up on Guam, which is a little tiny island in the South Pacific, and Guam is 90% Catholic, and my dad was very religious. And he thought because Adam was the first man in the Bible, and I was his first son, that would be a good name for me. In fact, the reasons why my siblings are named what they are for biblical reasons. They all have biblical sounding names. It's nothing super fantastic, but it does tell you a little bit about myself. It tells you about my identity, my culture, and where I grew up. There's also this quote in the textbook, and I apologize, I don't have this up on the slide, but the quote is, "Studies show that people often have negative appraisals not only for unusual names, but unusual spellings." People with unusual names were judged least likely to be hired. So there have been some studies that have been done in the United States where if somebody's named Juan and they just change their name to John, they don't change their resume, they just change their name from Juan to John, that they would suddenly start getting phone calls after months of applying. And that's a huge problem in our country, this bias. And of course, stereotypes are a huge problem in our country right now. Affiliation is a process of attaching meaning or connecting to other people or organizations. Language can build solidarity with others, and adapting your speech in a variety of ways can affiliate you with others. Now, our textbook also does warn us to use caution and to not overstep your boundaries. Some affiliations have cultural words that you probably shouldn't use unless you're truly embraced into that culture. I think a good example of this is the N-word. So some examples of inclusive language could be when you go to a 4-year university, there's a whole new language in academia that uses words like non-traditional students, alumni, foundation, scholars. These are all different lofty words that you don't really grab onto when you're in K through 12. So when you become part of that academy or that class, you start to have a new sort of inclusive language. You will also have inclusive language within your workplace for co-culture. If you have a special interest or a hobby, you're probably going to have language within those co-cultures as well. Remember back to chapter 2, those co-cultures are those different cultural sets that we belong to, whether it's family or friends or something related to your hobbies or career related. And those are all things that we affiliate with. Also, within affiliation, we discuss convergence and divergence. Convergence is the process of adapting your speech style to match that of others that you want to identify or network with. For example, you speak differently to your parents than you do to your friends. You converge your language to fit in with your peer group or to elevate it a little bit when you're talking to maybe family or teachers, or if you're trying to get that dream job. You definitely try to step up your language when you're in a professional environment. Divergence is speaking in a way that emphasizes differences. So take a minute to think about why you would want to have divergent language. Sometimes you want to show that you're divergent as a way to highlight something that you know that others don't. So definitely use convergence and divergence intelligently. It's not always appropriate to use either of them. I think the best bet is to always be yourself. Try to be sincere and honest. Sometimes divergence is a way to show that you have a special skill. Remember when I always say that I want you guys to ask questions as much as possible on the first day of class? Many of you have a trade or a profession that you're going into that has a lot of terminology that I wouldn't understand. For example, if you're going into the medical field, you may use language that I may not understand because I speak communication studies. So I completely understand that a lot of the words I use, you may not be able to understand initially, and I encourage you to always ask for clarity. Abstraction are convenient ways of overgeneralizing. We generalize people, we generalize ideas or what it is we're going to do. On the right-hand side of the screen, I have the abstraction ladder, which takes abstract ideas and condenses those down to specific observable behavioral descriptions. So if I notice that one of my students is struggling in class, I'm not just going to say, hey, can you bring your grades up? I would probably first address you by name and say, hey, how can I help you improve on your scores? I notice that you're struggling a little bit. What can I do to help you study a little bit better? So the abstraction ladder is finding something that's very vague and non-specific, but it does take it to an observable behavior. Here we talk about power and politeness and also disclaimers. Powerless language is tentative and indirect word choices with hedges and hesitations. So if you ask someone something and they're like maybe, or possibly, or potentially, they're using powerless language. Powerful language is direct and forceful word choices with declarations and assertions. I am going to the movie tonight is powerful language, whereas I might go or I might possibly go is powerless language. A disclaimer is another form of powerless speech that attempts to distance the speaker from remarks that might be unwelcome. This happens a lot in my class. speakers will try to downplay how prepared they are because they don't want any criticism to be aimed at their abilities. They'll say, "I'm sorry, I'm so nervous right now." And when they do that, it's so maybe the audience will think, well, no wonder the speech sounded like crap. She was nervous, instead of just thinking they were unprepared. Sexist language are words, phrases, and expressions that unnecessarily differentiate between men and women or exclude, trivialize, or diminish either sex. Not all sexist language is explicitly bad. I have been guilty of saying actress instead of actor or waitress instead of server. Some of us have not fully embraced those gender-neutral terms. We do use words like that often, and they're still very much a part of our language. I even noticed an ad the other day that was looking for waitresses, which means they were specifically asking for a female, which is not inclusive. So if we want to use inclusive language, we want to be gender neutral to encourage all sexes to apply, unless there was some super specific reason it needed to be a female-only job. We want to use gender neutral language. Sexist language also isn't necessarily just the words we use, but also the meanings we attach to words. Saying things like, women can't be in the army, or men can't be stay-at-home dads because men should be working, or things like that. So try not to diminish others from being able to have the same and equal rights and opportunities. Just take some time to think about the sexist language that you might use, maybe without even thinking about it. We're going to watch a short video here on ambiguous language.
No, more aloofness.
Whatever.
I'm not believing you.
Hi, when are we going to move on? I have been saying whatever for half an hour.
You can say very much by saying very little, small grasshopper. Pretend you're Lori and insult me.
Okay. Hey, hi, you're stupid.
Whatever.
Wow, that was great.
Yeah. Now, another part of this is ambiguity. Say it with me.
Ambiguity.
Very good. See, you don't want people to know exactly what you mean. Here, ask me if I want to go to a movie tonight.
Okay. Hi, would you like to go to a movie tonight?
That's cool. See, you don't know if I mean that's cool, I'll go, or that's cool, no thanks.
And that's cool.
Whatever.
Oh my God! I am so sorry I got impatient.
That's cool.
Hey guys. So, Jackie, Eric won't invite me to dinner tonight. So do you want to go to the mall or something?
That's cool.
Wait, what do you mean?
Oh my God, it worked. Whatever.
All right, so that's just a good example of how one word can have more than one definition and cause confusion. Sometimes people do this on purpose, or sometimes it's just a simple fact that our language can be very confusing. If you remember the earlier slide when I talked about how language is subjective and you hear words like rare, busy, depressed, and dinner, all of these have multiple meanings because language is subjective and they're going to mean different things. This goes right along with euphemisms. Euphemisms are used to soften the impact of unpleasant information. One of the examples in your textbook is if our dog or friend passed away, we usually don't just say our dog died. We would say my dog passed away or my dog went to heaven. Relative language is accurate through comparison. Examples would be things like near or far, slow or fast, short or long. Even relative language is subjective. For example, my dad is 5'7", but when I was a kid, I thought he was the tallest man in the world. I don't consider him to be tall at all today because I'm 6 feet. But this language is relative. It's based on our life experience and our positions in life. So relative language is your own personal perspective of comparison. Some people are used to long car rides. For example, if I'm driving from Escondido to Costa Mesa to visit my family, I don't think that's very far. It only takes me an hour and 15 minutes to get there. But some people think that's a very long car ride. So it's always very important to be clear when using relative language. Try to use specific measurements when possible, because just like ambiguous language, relative language can be ambiguous depending on the individual's perspective. Evaluative language adds an opinion. If I say, your hat is ugly, I told you my attitude towards your hat. If I say something smells really bad, instead of saying, well, that's an interesting aroma, then I've just given you a very strong emotional description. You're adding how you really feel about something. You can soften evaluative language by using euphemisms. For example, if you say someone is thrifty, it's kind of a nice way of saying that they're cheap. Instead of calling someone a coward, you could say that they're very cautious. There's always nicer, softer ways of saying things. So if you have the 14th edition, on page 152 is the page number. There are a ton of examples in your textbook of evaluative language. The language of responsibility involves it and but statements. It is something that you can use in place of I to take the heat off of you. Maybe you want to tell someone that their decision to skateboard in the middle of the street is a dumb idea. Instead of saying, I think that's a dumb idea, you could say, it's not the best idea to do that right now. You're refocusing the feeling on the idea being discussed. But statements are something we use all the time. But statements are basically a face-saving strategy. They're used to highlight the positive and to quickly follow it up with something negative. For example, if I were to tell a student, you wrote a great essay, but your grammar is all over the place and your punctuation is shit and you didn't follow my instructions at all. Well, I've just completely erased the entire positive comment saying that it was great. So it's just a face-saving strategy, but statements should always be removed and something that we need to phase out of our language a little bit. In addition to but and it, we have I, you, and we. I language is accepting responsibility. Instead of pointing the finger, we said I messed up or it's my fault. Remember that you statements express a judgment. If it's positive, that's a good thing. You did a great job. But you did a horrible job, that's calling someone out and it's highlighting the negative, and it's not always the best. We language is inclusive. We are adding the responsibility to all the communicators involved. I, you, and we language all use a level of assertiveness that is clearly expressing your thoughts, your feelings, and your wants. Gender and language. Two culture theory suggests that men and women grow up learning different ways to speak and act. There's some early research that suggests that men are more likely to use sentence fragments and I statements. Now, I could overgeneralize and say that men like to write research papers less than women do, but honestly, I find that many of the male students in my classes, at least, enjoy writing some of their essays and outlines. It also says that women are more tentative, more elaborate, and may use more emotional language. Now, these are overgeneralizations on some research. It had a solid basis when it was founded a few years ago, but modern research disagrees with this assessment. They have a minor differences approach, and it says that differences in talkativeness, affiliative speech, and assertiveness are negligible. Negligible means a tiny little bit. Instead of being a vast major difference, it's just a tiny little difference. And instead of gender differences, what they're talking about are these occupational factors and mitigating those gender differences. It talks about athletes or professionals in the workplace like teachers or lawyers, but those are roles that we step into instead of being a strictly male or female driven occupation. These things are guided by our professionalism or our education or our career, much so than whether or not you're a man or a woman. Gender power discusses talking styles that differ based on power in a relationship, whether one of the partners maybe makes more money or maybe one of them might have a stronger personality. So gender and power can definitely play a role in a relationship. Social media and online language. I'm going to go through these really quickly because you all completely understand social media and being online probably much more than I do. But our textbook does talk about shifting blame from the sender to device error. You ever sent an email or received an email that someone sent from their smart device? Like if I send an email from my iPhone, it usually says my name, Adam Navarro, and then in parentheses, sent from an iPhone. They say that this is acceptable because it shifts blame if you happen to make an error, because it's not that easy to send an email from your phone. People think, oh, I'm busy, or they know that It's okay, I'm on the go. It's all right if my syntax isn't perfect. Up next, we have impression management on dating websites, which includes our social media profiles. So ask yourself, do you edit your picture and make yourself look prettier or more handsome? Do you change your name to make it sound like something more attractive? Our textbook uses the name Alexander and says that someone with the name Alexander is 100 times more likely to be clicked on because it's considered an attractive name. The textbook also talks about how we pay more attention to our language, our tone, and our emotions when we're posting on social media. Normally, we like to keep our posts positive. We know that there's people out there that are very dramatic, and they'll say something really vague like, "It was the worst day of my life." And they use attention-seeking language so they know that you'll log in or text them and go, "Oh my God, what's wrong? Are you okay?" So these are just different ways that people can craft their language and craft their emotions in their social media posts. The final part of this chapter discusses how gender is illustrated in online communication, and it essentially says that men and women represent themselves differently in a digital or online environment. And it talks about how teenagers are more likely to be assertive and make proposals or talk or play games. So please take some time to look over those differences in online gender communication. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Please take some time to review the learning objectives. These are going to be the important takeaways from the chapter. So when you're studying for the exam, please go back through these. Study guides will be up on Canvas under Files. If you can't find those or you need any help, please reach out or send me an email. I hope you guys are doing well. Take care.